today is the big day. Today is the day we start Aftermath Life Debt. So this is the second book in the Star Wars Aftermath trilogy by Chuck Wendig. If you're just finding this video, go ahead and click here. This will take you back to the playlist of the first book where we went through Aftermath, the first novel, chapter by chapter, and broke it down week by week, and we had a really great time, and we're about to do it with this book. So if you missed going through Aftermath, but you've read the series before, please join us. Now's a great time to start in on the series again as we do Life Debt. And the playlist of past episodes is there for your viewing pleasure whenever you would like to go back and check that out. But with that, let's start with Life Debt. Oh my gosh. Right from the get-go, I'm remembering how much I enjoyed this book. Let's just kind of start with it. So, like all good Star Wars stories, it starts with a crawl, because why would something that's Star Wars ever think, gee, I should start without a crawl? The crawl was really fun. It basically kind of sets up the direction of where this book's going to go. It doesn't necessarily help you if you didn't read the first book, but it tells you right away that we're going to hear more about Han and Chewie in the story, and that they're going to be a big part. Of course, in the first Aftermath book, we had an interlude about Han and Chewie going into Kashyyyk. There's like an opening inside of Imperial security, and they're going to go in and try to take the planet back, and a large portion of this book is the fallout of that interlude. But we'll get to that in a second. The first thing we read is this interlude, or rather a prelude, on Jakku, 30 decades prior. So 30 decades prior, the Aftermath books are 1 year after Return of the Jedi, which puts them 5 years after A New Hope. So this puts us at 25 years before A New Hope. So this is certainly before the end of the Clone Wars, probably pretty close to before the Clone Wars are about to break out, is the time period we're in here, on the planet of Jakku, and we meet a young boy named Galli, Galli, and he encounters Tashu, who is the dark side Imperial guy from the first book. Funnily enough, the first time I read Life Debt, I read the entirety of Life Debt, not realizing who Tashu was, because I read Aftermath when it came out, and then months later I read Life Debt, and I forgot the name Tashu. So then when I reread both books before Empire's End, they got a lot better when I realized that the two Darksider worshipping guys were actually the same Darkside worshipping guy. There's not a whole lot I really have to say about the Prelude, oddly enough. There was a lot I had to say about it when I read it, but I can tell you that all of the answers to any questions you may have about it are going to come later in this book. And I already know the answers as I've already read the book, so I can't really fake speculation with you right now. But needless to say, we're on the planet of Jakku, planet that we've regularly been told is a useless planet, and a disciple of Palpatine is there, taking a small boy off of it, so there are things that are going to start happening. Then we're on to part 1. Woo, music. We open with Leia, who is having a phone call, the space version of a phone call with Han Solo. And what I kind of take from this is, I'm not sure if this is the first point in canon where we find out Han and Leia are already married, but just as a kind of comparison amongst universes note, one thing I really like about the new canon is it has Han and Leia married right away. If I'm remembering correctly, they literally got hitched after the Battle of Endor. They didn't waste any time. In Legends canon, they didn't get married right away. They were married by 5 years after Return of the Jedi, because that's when the Thrawn trilogy takes place, and at that point Leia's actually about to have kids. So like 3-4-ish years in Legends, they were hitched. But there was actually a very long road to marriage, that also involving Leia leaving Han and making him jealous by dating Space Fabio, and then Han kidnapped Leia and took her to a planet filled with Dathomir witches and Rancors. Really long, twisted tale in Legends. But in this one, they got married on Endor. So that's just a fun thing for me as I read through this, is that they just really didn't waste any time. Han and Leia are a couple right from the get-go. And that was good to know, too, because in The Force Awakens, it's not clear if they were just simply a couple that had a kid and split, or if they, went as far as to be married. But they were as far as to be married, and they were at least separated by the time we see them in The Force Awakens. That's a big thing there. The other kind of big thing is we learned that Han and Chewie did try to take back Kashyyyk, and it failed. And Chewbacca has been missing, so now Han is traipsing around the galaxy trying to save Chewbacca and get him back. Han has gone as far as to resign his commission with the military for the New Republic, and he's just kind of off on his own, which is really big because they're married. It'd be a little bit different if they were just kind of still in the awkward adult version of dating limbo right now. But instead, no, they're hitched, and he's just resigning and running off and doing things without telling her, and Leia, at some level, understands that this is just Han being Han, and they're kind of making it through. Then we get to Chapter 2. Oddly enough, through a hilarious miscommunication with my bookmark, I actually started reading Chapter 3 and taking notes on Chapter 3, only to realize that I completely skipped Chapter 2. So, that's not relevant to your life, but that's just the shenanigans I had while reading. But Chapter 2, when I actually went back and really read it, it's kind of fun. It's almost like this, it's kind of like this side short story. Like, what happened in Chapter 2 is not going to be a big deal for where the book goes from here on out, but it is a big deal because it tells you what this Aftermath crew is now. It's kind of like the equivalent of the beginning of The Phantom Menace, where you see Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan off doing Jedi things, or Anakin and Obi-Wan trying to rescue the Chancellor. Like, you get to see the Jedi off doing a Jedi mission in a movie. This is kind of similar. You get to see the Aftermath crew doing what they do in the interim between the two books, which is to hunt down Imperial runaways and bring them to justice. The big thing here is showing the team dynamics. So basically everyone in the team trusts each other now, except for this outlier, which is John Burrell. That is the special forces guy that kind of shows up partway through Aftermath and then just kind of joins the crew for reasons unknown. And his thing is, he doesn't trust Singer or Jazz. Basically, he has all of the misgivings that Nora had and has since moved past as a character, and now no longer has, just simply because, I don't know, we just need to keep distrusting each other, I guess. I just literally think he's performing a function that the book seems to think we need someone to perform the function of. But anyway, it won't stay that way forever. It's gonna be fine. Just don't worry about it. There's some confusion because Jazz pretends to sell them out, but really doesn't sell them out. Like, she does, but then she helps them get unsold out so that they can do the mission and she can get more money. I mean, really, at the end of the day, Jazz does do kind of a crappy thing that she probably shouldn't have done, or at least should have informed the team that she was doing. You know, whatever. She really didn't sell them out. She isn't really that bad of a person. I think it's just to kind of show the awkwardness of the team dynamics. That you have Jazz and Singer, who aren't really in it for the rightness or the wrongness, but they're in it because they're just kind of happy to do it, and they're still going to kind of be up to their things on the side, especially Jazz. Yeah, but really you just get to see how the team works together. We see the evolution of the Nora-Timon conundrum, which is Nora is terrified because she's bringing her son out into fighting, which she darn well should be, by the way. But she can't rightly leave him behind because she feels bad, and she doesn't like bringing him along, but she feels like she has to, and she thinks to herself, why can't I just decide to not be in the fight so I can raise my son? Which is something I ask her every time I read her character. I sound a little bitter, but really, I mean, at the end of the day, it's Star Wars. Timon's almost 16. There's a lot of kids that are off doing things. I never wonder why we drag Ahsoka into battle, so maybe I should kind of let this go, but really, I'm just like, yes, Nora. Yes, this is a question you should be asking yourself. But it is a very exciting chapter. It is a lot of fun. Granted, they do have Timon pilot, which he's very good at, and it does keep him pretty safe. Even though it is kind of putting him in the position where he's starting to take Imperial lives, and we'll have to deal with the fact that he has done that at some point. But we have Mr. Bones back. We see Timon growing as a character, and I like seeing kind of the core group and how well they work together. I like seeing Singer being confused that he actually trusts Jazz when he doesn't really trust anybody, and just kind of seeing how they've developed a little bit in between books. And John is a good addition to the crew just because he does keep things kind of moving and keep things on their toes. Where these chapters kind of leave off is at the end of chapter 1, Leia says that she needs to send somebody out after Han, because Han is now in Imperial trouble. Their call was ended in a burst of static. Just, you're supposed to assume through leap of logic that Leia is going to contact Nora and company to go get Han, and that's where the story is going to go from here. And like I said, I really enjoy where the story goes. We do end up on Kashyyyk, which I don't think is spoiling too much to say, and there's about to be some really good twists and turns coming up that I'm really excited to go through with you guys. These early chapters are really just kind of groundwork, and considering we already know where the galaxy is because we've just read the first book, it's just kind of more like reorienting, assuming you haven't read these books right away, kind of groundwork. I probably don't seem as excited about it as I could be. I do promise I am excited to get to this book. I'm just excited to kind of get to the meat of the book now that we are through the introduction. But for next week, let's go ahead and read chapter 3 and then next interlude. That's only 2 things, but so far these chapters have proved longer. We are going to have to probably do a couple thicker chunks of reading than we had to do in the first book, but just for next week, we'll do 3 and the interlude. That will kind of get the groundwork in for figuring out where we are with the Empire right now, which is something I'm a little bit more excited to talk about myself, especially because I already started partway through chapter 3 through a hilarious miscommunication with my bookmark. But let me know what you think of the beginning of this book so far. I know some of you who are reading with me have already kind of darted ahead, which is fine. I've already read the whole novel myself, so I'm happy to talk about where things are going. If you're not already, please follow us at Port Haven Forums on Twitter and visit port-haven.com for even more, and I will talk to you next week.